Welcome to the Radius Show, where our motto is to learn, know, and grow.
Hello, my name is Tabitha,
Hello, my name is Chindi.
and welcome back to the Radius.
Yes, and definitely this is a very good discussion. Okay, can you introduce us to the discussion, Tabitha?
Sure, today we're just going to broach the past week's events and more or less bring into perspective what we observe to be sort of the emphasis on certain news stories and the de-emphasization on others. What I mean by this is that the entire premise of starting the Radius actually came from an idea where I noticed and observed that the news isn't really sort of news anymore. It's not really something that's informing the public or enabling them to be engaged or enabling them to be active in terms of certain things. So in the past couple of days, on Saturday, August 12th, we observed there was a Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. On Monday, August 14th, there was a natural disaster in Sierra Leone, a mudslide that claimed many lives. And on Thursday, August 17th, there was a terror attack in Barcelona. Now, two of these events received unending media attention almost 24/7, moment to moment, and it was actually looping over and over. But we noticed that actually when it came to the Sierra Leone tragedy, there was very little attention, even though there was the sheer magnitude of the events were devastating and catastrophic.
Yes, and I really noticed a situation in which you look at the media. I've stopped watching the media, Tabitha, to be frank, because when I watch the media, all I'm saying is Charlottesville, the Spanish terrorist attack. I'm not seeing anything about Sierra Leone, so I just literally I just said, you know what, I'm done with the media and the mainstream media, because this is a big tragedy. That what happened in Sierra Leone is a human catastrophe, where there's a lot of people who died, and yet nobody is caring about that much. Well, there are few organizations you get to that, but most people are not even looking at it. If I told people there was a tragedy in Sierra Leone, most people don't even know about it, and that's just what's going on right now.
Well, there's several issues at play here. I like the phrase "silence is violence" because I feel that when you and not that any event is sort of more grotesque than the other. I mean, honestly, in Charlottesville, one person lost their lives, dozens were hurt. In Barcelona, 13 people are dead and 100 were injured. And in Sierra Leone, they're estimating approximately 400 people deceased and countless others, and I will get the number for you later, are missing or unaccounted for. So each of these are equally, they're equally tragedies in every sense. However, when I feel that when you cover Charlottesville and cover Barcelona, you create a sense of urgency. And that sense of urgency isn't there for some reason with Sierra Leone, and we'll explore that. I think another thing is that the market, one thing I remember being taught when I was younger and we were learning about the media, something they mentioned was if it bleeds, it leads. Meaning that if there's something, they want to capture the attention of the public. And then by capturing the attention of the public, they typically want to talk about celebrities, i.e. the Kardashians of the world, or O.J. Simpson going on parole, and things that are going to capture the attention of our public. And ultimately, are they catering to us, or are they talking down to us, really, is another concern. As far as right on the heels of all three of these matters, something that kind of came out to be quite mundane, the Eclipse. There was this huge build-up to the Eclipse, and when I think about resources that were put into, almost every social media platform had some kind of countdown or calculator, and all the sort of media outlets directed us to this thing about the eclipse. And to me, when you realize that only a portion of our country can observe it, for it to be like dominating the news is quite strange to me.
Definitely, it is. And what my observation is here is that it makes it look like it's biased, because I see this a lot. When something happens, like in Africa, some tragedy happens, usually not that many people pay attention to it, unless it's something like the American embassy or something, and everybody pays attention. But if it's like, something that just involves Africans, they're like, who cares, really? I mean, that's kind of the attitude of these media outlets, and it's really gotten to the point where it's clear bias. You can see that this is bias. I mean, the bias is in the coverage. You know, what goes out there, people will respond to it. If we go and do a fundraiser, you know, right now you're doing a fundraiser, Tabitha. You know, many people have been asking questions. What is this fundraiser about? Oh, so you know, what happened in Sierra Leone? It's not supposed to be that way. It's supposed to be like, oh, Sierra Leone, we know what happened, and I'll give you so much money. You know, it's really, that's the sadness of it, is that it doesn't get people's attention to contribute to help the people over there in Sierra Leone so that we can spare those who are homeless, those who have lost loved ones. Who knows, some of them may be orphaned, and so on and so forth. We help those people get on with their lives, and I think that's my major issue about that, is that when you don't cover that, indirectly you're contributing more to the suffering of those people in the area.
Indeed, silence is violence, I agree. And I think there's several things at play. So one thing I want to talk about is that we have the privilege of being born into the Western world, you and I, more or less.
Yes.
You lived in the Western countries, Western Hemisphere. You did have some time in Africa, of course, and abroad and things of that nature. And myself, of course, being born in the West.
Yeah.
We have the privilege to ignore these situations because our educational system does not emphasize anything that concerns the Southern Hemispheres and basically anything that's not Western.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, the direct comparison people made was in France, there was a terror attack. It was a tragedy. And basically, there became Facebook profiles you could change.
Yeah.
And then days later, was it Kenya? No, I'm sorry, Nigeria had a terrorist attack where almost 3 times the amount of people were murdered, and it was a blip on the radar. So it's something that's very condescending in our Western media, that it's sort of like we homogenize Africa into people can't distinguish the countries between each other. They can't distinguish what the issues may be. I think people hear Africa and they start to tune it out ultimately, and I don't know what it's going to take to sort of change the dichotomy that we have. If it's going to take more of us being independent media outlets and sort of giving equal time to all of these issues. And sort of what we're going to explore is actually the issues that led up to and later on in this podcast, we're going to explore the issues that led up to the mudslide and some of the supporting issues that caused or potentially caused the mudslide. So we have some data and some things to discuss, but will this occur on really a lot of my information came from Al Jazeera is what I want to get to, the blunt matter of it. It wasn't even something I can sort of dig through CNN to get the amount of data that I got. And I think this is the unequal attention that occurs. And we're bringing this to light to sort of, we're calling it eclipse because really something that dominated my news feed today was the eclipse. And I couldn't really even see it. I got a sense that there was an eclipse, but I didn't get to see it at all.
Mm.
So millions, if not billions of people were inundated with information about the eclipse. And I'm not stating that this is one, catastrophic event that occurred. Worldwide, these are issues. And why does our news sort of have this Western only perspective, where it's only our country or only the neighboring Western European countries that are emphasized?
Yes, you talked about maybe having our own media outlets. Al Jazeera is a very good example of a very successful media where the Arabs were covered a certain way and they came out and they managed to have a more neutral coverage. Therefore, not that there's not bias in the media, there's still bias about the Middle East, but at least you have Al Jazeera as a source, as a counter source to those biases, and that really makes a difference in terms of coverage. It's, to me, I really have to emphasize that, I don't know whether it has to do with, maybe the biases that have existed in the past carrying on to today. Maybe those biases are kind of perpetuated blindly. The people are perpetuating, they don't know that they're perpetuating these biases about Africa and other countries that they just don't feel are that important to them. When you see this when they're covering Pakistan or India also, so let's keep that in perspective. And so that's the major issue that I am looking at, and I think that's why I like what we are doing at the Radius is we're trying to broadcast this type of events because this is really sad that this is happening, that actually what is going on with Sierra Leone, that even my friend, one of my liberal friends, I'm not going to mention her name, she had no idea it happened. It's like, hi, how are you? Did you know it happened? She didn't know.
I'll tell you a hilarious story. I know somebody from Ghana, really. He came here and went to school, became a doctor, as a matter of fact. And around this time last year, again, there was a flood in Ghana. I want to say it transpired last year in the summer. He had no idea there was a flood.
Oh my.
He did not know. I directed him to all the news about it, but he was like one of the last people to know in my circle.
Oh my goodness.
Which I think is endemic of, again, he's living in the Western world. Mm. There's a media blackout when it comes to these things. And it basically translates to, no matter that it's 13 versus 1 versus 400, there's a ratio as if, like, no matter the larger the loss of life in Africa, it's almost as their lives are invaluable. Ultimately, it really translates to that because it's sort of de-emphasized as a blip on the radar in terms of things that get discussed. So just a timeline of events that transpired. On August 11th through the 14th, there was torrential rainfall. And essentially the town where this really transpired was a hillside town where people were illegally, sort of, I would call it what, like, I forget what the word is. My apologies.
Illegally staying there?
Right. They sort of constructed buildings and there was
slums, something like that.
Almost, yeah.
It's very common actually in Africa, but we'll talk more about that. Go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah. So people have constructed these sort of illegal, which means that they're probably not constructed properly, places to live in near Freetown. And that hillside essentially collapsed on Monday at 6 a.m. I remember learning about this because I was staying up super late on Sunday. So Sunday was more or less Monday at this point. And when it's Sunday here, it's Monday in Africa. And so I kind of saw, from what I think it was BBC Africa, actually, that was showing live footage of things collapsing, houses collapsing. The water was very high from the flood. And then what transpired is essentially because of how quickly and how the catastrophe played out, hundreds of people were homeless and many more are unaccounted for at this point. And basically the loss of life was so overwhelming that they're doing basically mass graves. Now in Sierra Leone, there's different religious belief systems. So in Islam, what they've tried to do actually is the government actually came forward and said that although we are in this unfortunate circumstance where we have to do mass graves, we're going to try to give people the most dignified burial because we're going to account for the fact that there's different belief systems here. In Islam, you kind of have to be buried rather quickly. So that's why they sort of attended to that so quickly, more or less. Now, several things that come to mind. Actually, I do want to acknowledge that the UK, Turkey, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates are sending aid, and the International Organization for Migration have released $150,000 in emergency funds. And the UN, from what I understand, is still doing their assessments. And the Red Cross is on the scene, naturally, but they're struggling to evacuate families that are buried deep in what you can imagine is mud, essentially. So trying to move dirt with a shovel at garden it's really heavy. So trying to move mud is like 3 times as heavy because it's compacted with the water. As far as numbers, as of Wednesday, they acknowledged that 400 people have died in the flooding. At least 109 children are among those who've been killed. And it's estimated that as of the moment where I'm reading this on Al Jazeera, it states that at least 600 people remain missing. So, and then another crisis as a result of this. So, of course, there's a flood, there's a massive loss of life, there's mass graves, there's a public health crisis, a public health and safety crisis emerging right now, too, because there's a potential threat of disease. So these are all the matters at hand, and the most direct comparison that reminds me of is like 2004 Katrina, where it was this overwhelming category 4 or 5 hurricane, and it was in a very, from what I can understand, the people who were left behind were the people without the capacity to leave, and they were overwhelmingly poor, and they were kind of, the floods were up and there were bodies in the water, and I remember the CDC saying that if you're there still, you have to leave, unfortunately, because of the public health and safety crisis. And it's just almost comparable to me in terms of the events that are playing out.
I do think that there's, what happens here, where there's a bias, you saw that with Katrina. I hate to mention this, but I don't see a lot of Amber Alerts for, people of color, really. I don't. I've not seen one yet. Maybe anybody please let me know or let us know on the comments. But I've never seen one, ever. It always, I'm not saying that we shouldn't care about anybody who is lost, any child who's lost, but we should be equitable. It should be something that we should all be alert about. But you don't see amber alerts for a black child or an Hispanic child. You don't see a lot of that.
And to double down on that point, what I want to sort of emphasize is that it's a matter of, well, maybe why, because people of color, let me put it this way. It's almost as in our Western world, it's the wealthier the nation, the more important and the more we care.
That's true.
So, countries that have a low GDP, that are struggling with poverty, it's sort of like this sort of shrugging shoulders because their lives are seen as less valuable. And I'm not trying to say that the news doesn't value life, but it's this sort of, again, what do you cover? You're the media. You cover things. So your emphasis is what tells us what you care about. And, I think some of the issues that are sort of byproduct issues of this whole matter that transpired in Sierra Leone is that it's a perfect way to bring up discussions about other stuff. Here's your segue into climate change. Why did it rain so much that it caused more or less a hillside to collapse?
Exactly.
That's the opening. Here's the icebreaker into the climate change phenomenon.
Exactly. Good point.
This you can segue right into that. Again, illegal construction on hillsides. That brings into play equity and fairness. I'm not well versed in international politics, but we typically know that when people live in shanty towns, they're the most marginalized and they're on the fringes, and there's possibly some inequality at play there. Again, another angle for people to talk about. There were not good enough warnings to prevent possibly a loss of life. There were meteorology. I don't know what if we got all our information from the media, and this is where we have to emphasize that you cannot get all your information from the media because I have to do some research about this. But apparently, and again, Al Jazeera mentions that the meteorology knew the rain was coming and the rain was happening, but did not have the adequate alerts to possibly prevent this massive loss of life.
Yes, I mean, the other major issue is that the government in Sierra Leone does not have enough resources to issue an alert, pull those people out so they can be put to safety before that tragedy happens. There's not enough resources that exist. Those things should be discussed. What should we do when we know that there's a crisis that's going to happen and there's a large number of people who die? We should have emergency response systems, even in poorer countries. And yet, you see this. You don't have this in, you didn't have that kind of system in Sierra Leone, and that's basically what has happened. I guarantee nobody probably knew that was going to happen until it was too late in those places. I bet you that's probably what happened. And that should be discussed. But nobody's discussing it in the media, so who's going to discuss that?
Exactly, and that's a beautiful point that you made. The media really sets the tone for public policy because they want to know what people are paying attention to.
Exactly.
So with that being said, let this be your way that you kind of bring up these issues that we discussed, these surrounding issues of equity and fairness, these issues of climate change, these public health and safety concerns, and it's really human rights. I don't know how else to put it. It's a matter of human rights.
Exactly. A great point. And you had a lot of knowledge on that, actually. I had more knowledge than I did, but thank you for that.
Well, it's been a pleasure talking with you, Chindi, and it's unfortunate that we have to discuss this, but I hope that the next time a tragedy of this magnitude happens, we're having a different discussion. What I want to open up to is the viewers and the listeners at the Radius. So please leave us comments. Please, discuss this really, even if it's not with us, but we would love for you to hear from you on this topic, but really have discussions in your community, because if you wait for the news to talk about it, I don't anticipate that it's going to be discussed.
Exactly. Definitely share it with us. Please do share this with other people as well. Listen to it. It's important that people get this news and get the news out there about what's going on in Sierra Leone. So share it, please. Thank you.
Thank you.